The orc woman collapsed against the doorframe of the cabin just as the first snow of winter began to fall. Her green skin streaked with blood from 3 distinct wounds, a gash across her left shoulder, a puncture in her side, and a deep cut along her right thigh. Henrik Whitmore looked up from the rabbit he had been skinning, his hands freezing mid-motion as he took in the sight of her standing there, swaying on her feet like a tree about to topple. She was massive, easily a head taller than him, with broad shoulders and muscular arms that bore the scars of countless battles. Her dark hair was matted with blood and dirt, pulled back in a loose braid that had come partially undone. Small tusks protruded from her lower jaw, and her pointed ears twitched as she tried to focus on him through eyes that were growing dim. "I have nowhere left in this world," she said, her voice rough but clear, before her knees buckled and she fell forward onto the wooden planks of his porch. Henrik dropped the rabbit and knife, rushing to her side despite every instinct that screamed at him to be cautious. Orcs were dangerous. Orcs were the enemy. Orcs had killed his brother during the border skirmishes 5 years ago. But this orc was bleeding out on his porch, and he had been a field medic in the war before he had retired to this isolated homestead in the northern frontier. Some habits ran deeper than hatred. He managed to drag her inside, which was no small feat given that she probably outweighed him by a good 60 pounds of pure muscle. Her blood left a trail across his floor, bright green against the weathered wood. Henrik had seen orc blood before, of course, usually on the battlefield, but never quite like this, never in his home, never from someone he was trying to save rather than fight. He got her onto the floor near the fireplace, knowing he would never manage to lift her onto his bed. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her skin already taking on a grayish tinge that he recognized as a sign of severe blood loss. Henrik moved quickly, pulling out the medical supplies he still kept in a chest near the hearth. Clean cloth, needle and thread, a bottle of strong spirits for cleaning wounds, and various herbs he had gathered during the summer months. The shoulder wound was the least severe, though it bled freely. The thigh wound was deep, but had missed the major vessels. It was the puncture in her side that worried him most. He could not tell how deep it went or what it might have damaged internally. Henrik cleaned his hands in the basin of water he kept near the fire, then began the work of cutting away her leather armor and the rough cloth beneath. She stirred as he worked on the side wound, her eyes fluttering open. They were a deep amber color, like honey held up to sunlight, and they fixed on him with a mixture of confusion and wariness. "Be still," he said quietly. "You will tear the wounds worse if you move." "You are human," she said, as if this fact had only just registered with her. "Yes. You should let me die." Henrik pressed a cloth soaked in spirits against the puncture wound, and she hissed in pain, her hand shooting up to grab his wrist. Her grip was iron strong even in her weakened state. He met her eyes steadily. "I was a medic in the war," he said. "I took an oath to preserve life where I could. I do not break my oaths, not even for old hatreds." She stared at him for a long moment, then released his wrist and let her hand fall back to the floor. "Then you are a fool." "Perhaps," Henrik agreed, and continued his work. He stitched the wounds as carefully as he could, packing them with a poultice of yarrow and comfrey to prevent infection and help with clotting. She made no sound during the entire process, though he could see her jaw clench with pain and sweat beading on her forehead. When he finally finished and wrapped clean bandages around her torso, thigh, and shoulder, he sat back on his heels, exhausted. "What is your name?" he asked. She was quiet for so long that he thought she might have lost consciousness again, but then she spoke. "Grukara, of the Ironbone clan, or I was until 3 days ago. What happened 3 days ago? I was cast out." She closed her eyes, turning her face away from him. I am clanless now, nameless in the eyes of my people." Henrik wanted to ask why, but the gray tinge was leaving her skin, and her breathing had steadied somewhat. She needed rest more than she needed an interrogation. He stood and fetched a blanket from his bed, spreading it over her large frame. It barely covered her, made for a human rather than an orc, but it would help keep her warm. "Rest," he said. "We can talk when you are stronger." Grukara opened her eyes again, looking up at him with an expression he could not quite read. Why what? Why do you help me?" "Your kind and mine have been at war for generations. I can smell old blood on you. You have killed orcs. Why not let me bleed out and save yourself the trouble?" Henrik looked down at her, at this warrior woman who had arrived at his door with nowhere else to go, and felt something shift in his chest. "Because I am tired of death," he said finally. "I came to this place to leave the war behind. I will not let it follow me through my own door." He turned away before she could respond, going to retrieve the rabbit he had abandoned and finish preparing it for the pot. Behind him, he heard her breathing slowly even out as she drifted into an exhausted sleep. The next 3 days were a careful dance of caution and necessity. Grukara was weak from blood loss and could barely stand without assistance. Henrik helped her drink water and thin broth, changed her bandages twice daily, and watched vigilantly for signs of infection. She remained largely silent, watching him with those amber eyes whenever she was awake, as if trying to puzzle out some great mystery. On the 4th day, she managed to sit up on her own, though the effort left her breathing hard. Henrik was at the table, cleaning his rifle more out of habit than need, since he rarely saw another soul out here and had no desire to hunt anything larger than rabbits or the occasional deer. "You were a soldier," Grukara said. "It was not a question." "Field medic," Henrik corrected. "I fought when I had to, but my job was to keep men alive. You must have been good at it. Good enough to keep myself alive." He set down the rifle and looked at her properly. She was still pale, but the wounds were closing cleanly and he had seen no signs of fever or rot. "You said you were cast out. Will your clan come looking for you?" Grukara laughed, a bitter sound. "No. When an orc is cast out, they are dead to the clan. They will not pursue me, will not speak my name, will not acknowledge I ever existed. What did you do to earn such punishment?" She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket. "I refused to kill a child," she said finally. "A human child from one of the border settlements. We raided the village. I was a warrior, that was my role. But when we fired the buildings, a girl ran out. Could not have been more than 7 summers. She was screaming, her dress on fire. I put out the flames and carried her to safety, left her far from the fighting where someone might find her." Henrik felt his throat tighten. "Your war chief saw this." "My brother saw it. He is war chief of the Ironbone now since our father fell in battle last spring. He called me weak, called me tainted by human sentiment, said I had betrayed the clan by showing mercy to the enemy." Her jaw clenched. "He gave me a choice. Kill the child myself or be cast out. I chose exile." "That took courage. It took foolishness," Grukara corrected harshly. "Now I have nothing. No clan, no honor, no place in the world. I am worse than dead. I am forgotten." Henrik stood and walked to the fireplace, stirring the pot of stew that hung over the flames. "You are not forgotten," he said quietly. "You are here. You are alive. That is not nothing. What life is this?" She gestured around the small cabin with its rough-hewn furniture and simple provisions. "Hiding in the woods like an animal, dependent on the charity of a human stranger who should hate me. I do not hate you. You should. I have killed humans. In battle, in raids. I have done things." Her voice cracked slightly and she looked away. "I am not innocent, Henrik Whitmore. Do not mistake one act of mercy for redemption." He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her, kneeling beside where she sat. "I have killed orcs," he said. "In battle, when they were trying to kill my patients or my fellow soldiers. I have done things I am not proud of. War makes monsters of us all, regardless of what color our skin is. But the war is over for me. I choose to be something else now." Grukara took the bowl with both hands, and he noticed that they were shaking slightly. "What do you choose to be?" "A man who lives quietly and harms no one. A man who grows vegetables and hunts only what he needs to survive. A man who keeps his oaths." He met her eyes. "You may stay here until you are healed and strong enough to decide what comes next. That is my offer. No obligation, no strings, just time to recover." "Why?" she asked again, that same question from the first night. Henrik smiled faintly. "Because you saved a child when it cost you everything. That speaks to who you are beneath the warrior's scars. And because this cabin is too quiet sometimes, and it might be good to have company for a while." Grukara stared at him for a long moment, then lifted the bowl to her lips and drank the broth. When she lowered it, there was something different in her expression, not quite trust, but perhaps the first fragile seedling of it. The days turned into weeks, and the snow fell deeper around the cabin. Grukara healed slowly but steadily, and as her strength returned, she began to insist on helping with the daily tasks. Henrik protested at first, worried she would reopen her wounds, but she was stubborn and refused to lie idle while he worked. They fell into a routine. Henrik would wake before dawn and start the fire, then go out to check his snares and feed the chickens he kept in a small coop attached to the cabin. Grukara would prepare breakfast, which usually consisted of porridge or eggs, and by the time he returned with whatever game he had caught, the cabin would be warm and the food ready. She was not much of a cook, she admitted with what might have been embarrassment, because orc women of the warrior class were trained to fight, not to tend hearths. But she learned quickly, watching how he prepared meals and asking questions about the herbs he used for flavoring. In the afternoons, they would work on various tasks around the homestead. There was always wood to chop, repairs to make, supplies to organize for the long winter ahead. Grukara was incredibly strong, even while still recovering, and she could split logs with an ease that would have taken Henrik twice as long. He found himself watching her sometimes when she was absorbed in a task, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her tusks caught the light when she turned her head a certain way, the way her muscles moved beneath her green skin. It was disconcerting to realize he found her beautiful in a fierce, wild way that was entirely unlike any human woman he had known. The evenings were the strangest time, when they would sit by the fire and talk. At first, the conversations were stilted and careful, both of them dancing around topics that might lead to conflict. But gradually, they began to share more. Grukara told him about growing up in the Ironbone clan, about the harsh training of orc warriors, about the songs her mother had sung before she died in childbirth when Grukara was 12. She spoke of the rigid honor codes that governed orc society, the constant struggle for status and respect, the way mercy was seen as weakness and compassion as betrayal. Henrik told her about his childhood on a small farm much like this one, before the war came and burned it to the ground. He told her about training as a medic, about the countless men he had tried and failed to save, about the brother who had died screaming in his arms from a poison-tipped orc arrow. He told her about the decision to leave the army and build a new life in the frontier, away from everything that reminded him of loss. "Do you hate orcs?" Grukara asked one night, her voice soft in the firelight. "Truly." Henrik considered the question carefully. "I did," he admitted. "For a long time after my brother died, I hated everything about your people. I saw you all as monsters, as things to be destroyed. But hatred is exhausting, Grukara. It burns you up from the inside until there is nothing left but ash. I decided I would rather be something other than ash. And now. He looked at her, this orc woman who sat across from him wrapped in his spare blanket, her wounds nearly healed and her amber eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Now I know at least one orc who is not a monster," he said quietly. "And that makes me wonder how many others I was wrong about." Grukara's hand moved to touch the bandage at her side, a gesture he had noticed she made when she was emotional. "Your brother," she said. "What was his name?" "Harold. We called him Hal. I am sorry for your loss. I am sorry that my people caused you such pain. And I am sorry that my people have caused yours pain as well. This war has gone on so long that no one remembers how it started, only how to keep fighting. We pass hatred down like an inheritance, teaching our children to fear and kill before they are old enough to question why." "The child I saved," Grukara said suddenly. "The girl, I keep wondering if she survived, if someone found her, if she made it home safely. I will never know." Henrik leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You gave her a chance. In the middle of violence and death, you gave an innocent child a chance at life. That matters, Grukara. It matters more than you know." She met his eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than words. Henrik felt his heart beat faster, felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "I should get more wood," he said abruptly, standing up and moving toward the door before he could examine that feeling too closely. Behind him, Grukara made a sound that might have been agreement, but when he glanced back, she was staring into the flames with an expression that looked remarkably like longing. The winter deepened, and the world outside became a white wilderness of snow and ice. Henrik was glad for the supplies he had laid in during the autumn, because leaving the cabin was becoming increasingly difficult. The snow drifted as high as the windows in some places, and the temperature dropped so low that the water in the basin would freeze overnight despite the fire burning constantly. They were trapped together in the small space, closer than either of them had anticipated. The cabin that had seemed comfortable for one person felt cramped with two, especially when one of them was an orc woman who took up considerable space. They learned to move around each other in a careful dance, to respect each other's need for quiet or solitude, to share the limited resources without complaint. It was during this time that Henrik began to notice small things about Grukara that made his chest feel tight. The way she would hum while she worked, low, rumbling melodies from her homeland that were surprisingly soothing. The way she laughed rarely, but with her whole body, a sound of pure joy that transformed her face. The way she had started to smile at him, small, quick expressions that appeared and vanished like sun through clouds. He was falling for her. The realization hit him one morning as he watched her braiding her hair by the firelight, her strong fingers working through the dark strands with practiced ease. He was falling in love with an orc woman, someone who should be his enemy, someone his people would revile him for even sheltering, let alone caring for. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt inevitable, like a river finding its way to the sea. But he kept the feeling locked away inside himself, uncertain how she would react, afraid of breaking the fragile peace they had built. Grukara gave no sign that she felt anything for him beyond gratitude and perhaps friendship. She was always proper, always maintaining a respectful distance, never touching him except when necessary during their daily work, until the night of the storm. It came howling out of the north, a blizzard so fierce that the entire cabin shook with the force of the wind. Henrik had weathered bad storms before, but this one was different. He could hear trees cracking and falling in the woods around them, could feel the cold seeping through every gap in the walls despite the roaring fire. Grukara was standing by the window, peering out into the white chaos. "I have never seen a storm like this, even in the mountains of my homeland," she said, her voice tight with concern. "We are safe inside," Henrik assured her, though he was not entirely certain of that himself. "The cabin is solidly built." As if in response to his words, there was a tremendous crack of wood splitting and the entire structure lurched. Henrik stumbled, grabbing the table for support. Grukara moved with the instinctive grace of a warrior, catching him before he could fall. "The roof," she said, looking up. "Something has hit the roof." Henrik could hear it now, the sound of branches scraping against the wooden shingles, a heavy weight pressing down. "A tree must have come down on us." They spent the next hour in tense vigilance, watching as small cracks appeared in the ceiling beams and snow began to sift through gaps in the roof. Henrik tried to shore up the weak points with whatever materials he had on hand, but it was clear that the cabin had taken serious damage. The temperature inside began to drop as the night wore on, the fire struggling to heat the space against the increased draft. Henrik pulled on every layer of clothing he owned and gave Grukara the heaviest blankets, but even so, they both began to shiver. "We need to conserve heat," Grukara said through chattering teeth. "In my clan, warriors in winter campaigns would share body warmth to survive the nights." Henrik understood what she was suggesting, and his face grew hot despite the cold. "I do not want to make you uncomfortable." She looked at him with those amber eyes, and there was something fierce in them. "I trust you, Henrik Whitmore. You have had countless opportunities to harm me while I was weak, and you chose kindness instead. I am not afraid to share warmth with you." They arranged themselves on the floor near the fire, Grukara's back against Henrik's chest, blankets wrapped around them both. He could feel the heat of her body through the layers of fabric, could smell the scent of her hair, wood smoke, and something earthy and wild. His heart was pounding so hard he was certain she could feel it. "Is this all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said, and then after a pause, "Thank you for everything. For saving my life, for giving me shelter, for treating me like a person instead of a monster." Henrik tightened his arms around her slightly, an instinctive gesture of comfort. "You are a person, Grukara. You have always been a person to me." She made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "I feel more human here with you than I ever felt among my own kind. Is that strange?" "No," he said softly. "I think perhaps we recognize in each other what we have been looking for without knowing it: peace, acceptance, a place to belong." Grukara turned in his arms then, shifting so she could look up at his face. They were so close he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes, could feel her breath warm against his skin. "Henrik," she said, his name a question and a prayer. He cupped her face with one hand, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I care for you," he said, the words coming out rough with emotion. "I know I should not, I know it is impossible, but I cannot help it. You have become important to me." "Important," she repeated, and there was something like wonder in her voice. "I am important to you." "You are everything to me," he corrected, throwing caution aside and speaking from his heart. "These weeks with you have been the happiest I have known since before the war. You make me laugh, you make me think, you make me want to be better than I am. I know you will leave when spring comes, but until then I want you to know that you are cherished here, you are wanted, you have a place, even if it is just in this small cabin with me." Grukara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I do not want to leave when spring comes," she whispered. "I want to stay with you if you will have me." Henrik felt his heart soar. "If I will have you, Grukara, there is nothing I want more. But are you certain? Life here is simple and hard. You would be isolated from your own kind, living with a human in the middle of nowhere." And if we were discovered, let them discover us, she said fiercely. I am already cast out from my people. I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Here with you I am more than a warrior or a clan member. I am myself. I am Grukara, and I am free to choose my own path. I choose you, Henrik Whitmore, if you will have me. He kissed her then, carefully, mindful of her tusks, pouring everything he felt into that gentle press of lips. She kissed him back with a fierceness that stole his breath, her strong arms wrapping around him and pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henrik rested his forehead against hers. We will face whatever comes together, he promised. I will not let anyone take you from me. And I will defend this place and you with my life, Grukara vowed. You have given me a home when I had none. You have given me love when I thought myself unlovable. I am yours if you will be mine. I am yours, Henrik said and kissed her again. They held each other through the remainder of the storm, sharing warmth and whispered words and gentle touches. When dawn finally came, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, they emerged from the blankets to assess the damage to the cabin. A large pine tree had indeed fallen across the roof, crushing a section of the shingles and cracking two of the support beams. It would take significant work to repair, work that would be made more difficult by the deep snow and ongoing cold. But as Henrik stood looking at the damage with Grukara at his side, he felt only a calm determination. We can fix this, Grukara said, her hand finding his. Together, we can fix anything. Henrik squeezed her hand and smiled. Yes, together. They spent the next 2 weeks working on the repairs. Grukara's strength made it possible to move the fallen tree and clear away the debris, while Henrik's knowledge of carpentry guided the reconstruction. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, speaking little but moving in harmony, learning to anticipate each other's needs and movements. At night, they would collapse by the fire, exhausted but content, and fall asleep in each other's arms. Henrik had never known such happiness, such simple joy in shared labor and shared warmth. The cabin was drafty and cold with the roof partially open, but he barely noticed when Grukara was beside him. When the repairs were finally complete, and the roof was solid once more, they celebrated with a feast of roasted venison and the last of Henrik's stored vegetables. Grukara had learned to cook remarkably well over the winter, and the meal was delicious despite their limited ingredients. To new beginnings, Henrik said, raising his cup of weak beer. To home, Grukara replied, touching her cup to his. They drank, and then Grukara set down her cup and reached for something at her belt. She pulled out a small knife, its blade well worn but clearly cared for, and held it out to Henrik. In Orc tradition, she said slowly, when two warriors wish to bond themselves together, they exchange weapons. It is a symbol of trust, of partnership, of shared strength. I know you are not an orc, and I have no right to ask this of you according to my people's ways, but I have no other tradition to draw on, and I need to make this real somehow. Henrik felt his throat tighten with emotion. He stood and went to the chest where he kept his few possessions, pulling out the rifle he had cleaned that day so long ago when Grukara first spoke of her exile. It was the weapon he had carried through the war, the tool that had kept him alive through countless battles. He had not fired it in years, but he kept it maintained, a link to the man he had been. He brought it back to Grukara and held it out to her. This rifle has been with me through the worst times of my life, he said. It represents everything I was before I came here. I give it to you freely, as a symbol of my trust and my love. I am yours, Grukara. In whatever tradition, by whatever rights, I am yours. She took the rifle with reverence, running her hands along the stock, and then handed him the knife. It was smaller than the rifle, but no less meaningful. Henrik could see the marks of care on it, the way the blade had been sharpened countless times, the leather grip worn smooth by years of use. "This was my mother's knife," Grukara said softly. "The only thing I took with me when I was cast out. It is all I have of her, of my old life. I give it to you, Henrik Whitmore, as a pledge of my love and my loyalty. I am yours in this life and whatever comes after." Henrik took the knife and drew it gently across his palm, letting a few drops of blood well up. Grukara's eyes widened, and then she understood. She did the same, cutting her palm and then pressing it to his so their blood mingled, green and red flowing together. "Bonded," she said, her voice shaking. "By blood and choice we are bonded." "Bonded," Henrik repeated and pulled her into his arms. They made love that night for the first time, gentle and careful with each other despite the passion that burned between them. Henrik learned the landscape of Grukara's body, the scars that marked her green skin, the strength in her muscles, the softness of her lips when she smiled against his. Grukara learned his body in turn, her touches tentative at first, and then more confident as she discovered what made him gasp and moan. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Henrik's bed, finally big enough for both of them when they were this close. Grukara traced patterns on Henrik's chest with one finger, her expression thoughtful. "What happens when spring comes?" she asked quietly. "When travelers begin to move through the frontier again, when people might come this way and discover us?" Henrik had been thinking about this question as well. "We will need to be careful," he admitted. "If the wrong people found out about us, it could be dangerous. There are those who would see you dead simply for being an orc, and others who would see me as a traitor for sheltering you. But this land is remote, and I chose it specifically because I wanted to be left alone. We can manage. And if your people come, if soldiers or settlers arrive and demand you turn me over," Henrik's arms tightened around her, "then they will have to go through me first. I will not give you up, Grukara. Not for any reason, not to any person. You are mine and I am yours, and that is the end of it." She buried her face against his shoulder, and he felt wetness on his skin, tears, he realized. Grukara was crying silently, her body shaking with emotion. "No one has ever fought for me before," she whispered. "Not my clan, not my family. I was always expected to fight for myself, to prove my strength, to earn my place. But you would fight for me. You would stand against your own kind for me." "I love you," Henrik said simply. "That means I will always fight for you, stand with you, defend you. It means you are not alone anymore, Grukara. You have me, and I have you, and together we are stronger than we could ever be apart." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and they came together again in the darkness, proving with their bodies what their words had already declared. The winter began to loosen its grip as the weeks passed. The snow started to melt, creating streams and rivulets that ran down from the mountains and swelled the creek that passed near Henrik's property. The days grew longer, the sun warmer, and the first brave shoots of green began to appear in the places where the snow had retreated. Henrik and Grukara worked together to prepare for spring planting. They cleared the old vegetable garden of debris and dead plants, turning over the soil and mixing in composted material from the previous year. Grukara had never farmed before, but she learned quickly, her warrior's discipline serving her well in this new endeavor. "It is strange," she said one afternoon as they worked side by side, planting early peas and onions. "In my clan, I was taught that working the soil was beneath a warrior's dignity. Growing food was for the weak, for those without the strength or courage to take what they needed through battle. But this feels right. This feels like building something rather than destroying it." Henrik smiled, brushing dirt from his hands. There is strength in creation as well as destruction. It takes patience and care to nurture life from the ground. That is a different kind of courage than facing an enemy in battle, but no less valuable. I am learning that from you, Grukara said, looking at him with soft eyes. You are teaching me a new way to be strong. They were so absorbed in their work that they did not notice the rider approaching until the horse was almost at the edge of the clearing. Henrik looked up at the sound of hoofbeats and felt his heart sink. A man in the rough clothes of a frontier settler sat atop a bay gelding, staring at them with an expression of shock and growing horror. Henrik stood slowly, putting himself between Grukara and the stranger. "Can I help you?" He called out, trying to keep his voice neutral. The man seemed to find his voice. "There is an orc on your property," he said, his hand moving to the rifle strapped to his saddle. "A green-skinned monster right here in plain sight." "This is Grukara," Henrik said firmly. "She is under my protection. She means no harm to anyone." "Under your protection?" The man's face twisted with disgust. "Have you lost your mind, Whitmore? That thing is probably scouting for a raid. How long before her savage friends come down from the mountains and slaughter us all in our beds?" Grukara stood as well, and Henrik could see her hand moving toward where she normally kept her knife, only it was not there anymore, because it was inside the cabin where he kept it safe. She had his rifle instead, which was also inside. Neither of them was armed, which might be fortunate given the way this conversation was going. "Grukara has no clan," Henrik said, keeping his voice level. "She has been living here peacefully through the winter, helping me maintain my homestead. She is not a threat to you or anyone else." "Living here," the man's voice rose. "You have been harboring an orc, feeding it, sheltering it. What other unnatural things have you been doing with this monster?" Henrik felt rage flash through him, hot and sudden. "Watch your tongue," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Speak about her with respect or leave my property now." The man laughed, a harsh sound. "Respect for an orc? You are as much a monster as she is, Whitmore. Wait until I tell the others about this. We will see how long you and your pet orc last when the whole settlement knows what you are doing up here." He wheeled his horse around and kicked it into a gallop, disappearing into the trees before Henrik could respond. Henrik stood frozen, watching the place where the rider had vanished, his mind racing through the implications. Grukara came to stand beside him, her face carefully neutral. "He will tell others," she said quietly. "They will come for me, for us." "Yes," Henrik agreed, because there was no point in denying it. "They will come. Then I should leave. Now, before I bring more trouble down on you, if I am gone when they arrive, you can claim I forced you to shelter me, that you were waiting for a chance to drive me off. They might believe you. They might leave you alone." Henrik turned to her, taking her shoulders in his hands. "No," he said fiercely. "I will not send you away. I will not lie and pretend you were anything other than welcome here. I will not betray what we have built together. Henrik, they will kill you. Or cast you out at best, make you an exile like me. You will lose everything. I have already lost everything once," Henrik interrupted. "When the war took my family, my home, my brother. I rebuilt my life here in this isolated place, thinking that was enough. But it was not enough, Grukara. It was just existing day after day, alone with my memories and my grief. You gave me something to live for again. You gave me joy and purpose and love. I will not give that up without a fight." Grukara's eyes were bright with tears. "What can we do?" "There are only two of us, and if the settlement sends men, then we defend our home," Henrik said simply. "Together, just as we have done everything else. We are stronger than they know, Grukara. You are a trained warrior, and I am a veteran who knows how to handle a rifle. We have the advantage of position up here, and we know the land better than any group they might send. It is not hopeless. You would fight your own people for me. They stopped being my people the moment they decided to threaten you, Henrik said. You are my people now, Grukara. You are my family, my home, my future. I will defend you with everything I have. She pulled him into a fierce embrace, holding him so tightly he could barely breathe. I love you, she said against his hair. I love you, Henrik Whitmore, and I will stand with you against whatever comes. They had 4 days before the settlers arrived. 4 days to prepare, to gather their weapons and supplies, to turn the cabin into a defendable position. Henrik retrieved his rifle and began cleaning and loading it properly for the first time in years. Grukara sharpened every blade they owned and practiced with the bow that Henrik had made for hunting, but which could serve for defense as well. They reinforced the door and shuttered the windows, leaving only small gaps through which they could shoot if necessary. Henrik did not want to kill anyone if he could avoid it. These were his former neighbors, people he had traded with and occasionally seen at the settlement's rare gatherings. But he would do what he must to protect Grukara. On the evening of the 4th day, they saw smoke rising from multiple fires in the direction of the settlement. A gathering, Henrik thought. A meeting to decide what to do about the human who had taken an orc as a lover. He wondered what they would decide, whether there would be any voices speaking in their defense, or whether the hatred would be unanimous. They had their answer at dawn the next morning, when a group of roughly 20 men rode into the clearing in front of the cabin. They were armed with rifles, pistols, and farming tools that had been repurposed as weapons. At their head was Samuel Hendricks, the unofficial leader of the settlement, a grizzled veteran of the Orc Wars who had lost an arm in battle. Henrik stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. Grukara stood just inside the doorway, visible but not threatening, her bow held ready at her side. Samuel, Henrik said quietly, you did not need to bring so many men just to talk. We are not here to talk, Henrik, Samuel said, his voice hard. We are here to deal with the orc problem you have created. That green skin has to go one way or another. The question is whether you will stand aside and let us do what needs to be done, or whether you will force us to go through you first. She stays, Henrik said simply. Grukara is not a threat to anyone. She has been living here peacefully for months. She has attacked no one, stolen nothing, caused no trouble. There is no reason to harm her. No reason. Another man spoke up, his face red with anger. She is an orc, Henrik. Her kind have been raiding our settlements, killing our people, burning our homes for generations. How many of us here have lost someone to the green skins? How many have scars from orc blades? And how many orcs have lost family to human blades? Henrik countered. This cycle of violence has to end somewhere with someone. I am choosing to end it here in this place with this person. Grukara saved a human child when it cost her everything, her clan, her honor, her place in the world. She chose mercy over violence, and she was punished for it by her own people. Does that not tell you something about who she is? It tells me she is a liar and a threat, Samuel said. Orcs do not know mercy. This is a trick, some scheme to get us to lower our guard before the real attack comes. Grukara stepped forward then, moving to stand beside Henrik on the porch. I am no liar, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. I am clanless, cast out by my own people for the crime of compassion. I have nowhere to go, no one to turn to, except this man who saved my life when he could have let me bleed to death on his doorstep. I am guilty of many things. I have killed humans in battle. I have raided your settlements. I have done violence in the name of my clan. But I am trying to be something different now. I am trying to build a life based on peace, not war. If you kill me, you prove that there is no path forward except more bloodshed. Is that really what you want? Her words created a stir among the gathered men. Henrik could see some of them shifting uncomfortably, uncertain, but Samuel's face remained hard. "Pretty words from a monster," he said. "But words are cheap. Actions matter, and the action I see here is a human who has betrayed his own kind to take up with the enemy. That cannot be allowed to stand, Henrik. It sets a dangerous precedent. If we let you keep this orc, what is to stop others from doing the same? What happens to our society when people start treating green skins like they are the same as us? Maybe we become better than we are," Henrik said quietly. "Maybe we start to see that orcs are not mindless monsters, but people with their own hopes and fears and dreams. Maybe we find a way to end this war that has cost all of us so much. Is that really so terrible, Samuel?" "Yes," Samuel said flatly, "because it is not real. You have been fooled, Henrik, seduced by that creature's tricks. She has you thinking she is harmless, maybe even made you care for her, but it is all a lie. Orcs are incapable of love or kindness. They are animals and they need to be treated as such." Henrik felt Grukara stiffen beside him, saw her hand tighten on her bow, but she did not speak or move. He was proud of her restraint, knowing how much those words must hurt. "If you believe that," Henrik said, "then you are the one who is fooled. I know Grukara better than I have known anyone in my life. I have seen her kindness, her courage, her capacity for change. She is more human than some humans I have met, certainly more compassionate than you are being right now. And I will not let you harm her, Samuel. Not you, not your men, not anyone. She stays and I stand with her. That is my final word." Samuel sighed, a sound of genuine regret. "Then you give us no choice," he said. He raised his hand, and the men behind him began to spread out, forming a loose circle around the cabin. "We will give you 1 hour to reconsider, Henrik. 1 hour to send the orc out and pledge your loyalty to your own people. If you do not, we will take her by force, and anyone who stands in our way will be considered an enemy." "I have already reconsidered," Henrik said. "My answer will not change in an hour or a year. Grukara is my family now. Touch her and you touch me." Samuel shook his head sadly. "So be it." "I am sorry it has come to this, Henrik. You were a good man once." "I am still a good man," Henrik replied. "I am just choosing to love someone you think I should hate. That does not make me evil, Samuel. It makes me human." He turned and went back into the cabin with Grukara, barring the door behind them. Through the gaps in the shutters, they could see the men settling in, clearly prepared to wait out the hour and then attack if necessary. Grukara set down her bow and took Henrik's hand. "You can still end this," she said softly. "Send me out. Tell them I forced you. Save yourself." "No," Henrik said firmly. "We made vows to each other, Grukara. By blood and choice we are bonded. I meant those vows. I will not break them now. Even if it means your death, even then. Though I do not plan to die today." Henrik checked the ammunition for his rifle, his mind already working through tactics and strategies. "We have a strong position here, good sight lines, limited approaches. They will have to come at us across open ground if they want to reach the cabin. We can make that very costly for them." "You are talking about killing them," Grukara said. "Your own people." "I am talking about defending our home," Henrik corrected. "If they choose to attack, they accept the consequences. I will aim to wound rather than kill if I can, but I will not let them take you from me." Grukara pulled him into a hard kiss. "Then we fight together," she said, "as we do everything else, together." The hour passed with agonizing slowness. Henrik and Grukara took up positions at opposite windows, watching the men outside. Some of them were clearly nervous, shifting in their saddles or checking their weapons repeatedly. Others seemed grimly determined, their faces set in hard lines. When the hour was up, Samuel called out again. "Last chance, Henrik. Send out the orc and live. Refuse and we come in." "Come ahead," Henrik called back. "But know that the first man through that door is a dead man. I do not want to kill anyone, Samuel, but I will defend my home and my family. Choose wisely." There was a long moment of tense silence. Then Samuel made a sharp gesture, and several of the men dismounted, moving toward the cabin with their weapons ready. Henrik fired a warning shot over their heads, the crack of the rifle echoing through the clearing. The men froze, looking back at Samuel uncertainly. "The next one will not be a warning," Henrik shouted. "I am a veteran marksman, Samuel. You know I do not miss. Turn back now while you still can." One of the younger men, someone Henrik did not recognize, broke from the group and charged toward the cabin with a wild yell. Henrik tracked him smoothly and fired, the bullet catching him in the leg and sending him crashing to the ground, screaming. The other men pulled back immediately, dragging their wounded companion with them. Henrik could hear them arguing among themselves, voices raised in anger and fear. Grukara had her bow ready. An arrow knocked and aimed at the cluster of men, but she had not loosed it yet. "They are afraid now," she said quietly. "They did not expect real resistance." "They thought I would fold when it came down to it," Henrik said, already reloading his rifle. "That I would choose my own safety over you. They were wrong." The standoff continued for hours. The settlers tried a few more approaches, but each time Henrik or Grukara drove them back with warning shots. Henrik was careful to avoid killing anyone, but he made it clear that he could if he chose to. The wounded man from earlier was bandaged and placed on a horse, groaning in pain but alive. As the sun began to set, Samuel called out again. "You cannot hold out forever, Henrik. Sooner or later you will run out of ammunition or supplies. We can wait as long as it takes." "Then you will be waiting a long time," Henrik called back. "I have enough food and water to last months if necessary, and enough ammunition to keep shooting for weeks. How long can your men afford to stay here, Samuel? They have farms to tend, families to feed. Are you really going to keep them camped outside my cabin indefinitely, just because I love someone you do not approve of?" He heard more arguing from the group of men, voices raised in disagreement. The siege was already costing them more than they had anticipated, and Henrik suspected their resolve was starting to crack. As darkness fell, Henrik and Grukara took turns watching the windows, one sleeping while the other kept guard. It was exhausting work, the constant vigilance wearing on both of them, but they maintained their defense without complaint. On the second day, 3 of the men packed up and rode away, clearly unwilling to continue the siege. On the third day, 5 more left. By the 4th day, only Samuel and 6 others remained, and they looked tired and frustrated. Henrik had not fired his rifle since that first day, but the threat of it was enough to keep the remaining men at a distance. He could see them starting to lose hope, the reality of the situation settling in. They could not take the cabin without casualties they were not willing to accept, and Henrik showed no signs of surrendering. On the 5th day, something changed. Henrik was watching through the window when he saw a lone rider approaching from the direction of the settlement. As the figure drew closer, he realized with surprise that it was a woman unusual, since the siege had been entirely male up to this point. The woman rode directly up to where Samuel and his men were camped and dismounted. Henrik could not hear what was said, but he saw Samuel's face darken with anger, saw him gesturing sharply. The woman stood her ground, speaking calmly but firmly, and gradually other women began to arrive, riding or walking into the clearing. Grukara appeared at his shoulder. "What is happening?" "I think the women of the settlement have come to put a stop to this," Henrik said, watching with growing hope. One of the women, an older lady named Martha who ran the settlement's trading post, raised her voice loud enough for Henrik to hear. This has gone on long enough, Samuel Hendricks. You have been out here nearly a week, neglecting your responsibilities, wasting resources, and for what? Because one man chose to live his life differently than you approve of. That man is harboring an orc, Samuel shot back. He is a traitor to his own kind. He is a man who showed mercy to someone in need, Martha countered. The same mercy we expect others to show us when we are in trouble. Henrik Whitmore has never caused this settlement any harm. He pays his debts, trades fairly, and keeps to himself. If he wants to share his home with an orc woman who apparently saved a human child at great cost to herself, that is his business, not ours. You do not understand the danger. I understand that my husband and sons have been gone for 5 days while the planting needs to be done. Another woman interrupted. I understand that we are wasting time and energy on something that does not concern us. I understand that there has been no orc raid, no violence, no threat to our safety from Henrik or his companion. What I do not understand is why you are so determined to destroy a peaceful household when there are real threats we should be worrying about. More women spoke up, voicing similar sentiments, and Henrik watched as the remaining men began to look uncomfortable. It was one thing to defy Henrik, but quite another to go against their wives and mothers and sisters when those women were united in opposition. Finally, Samuel held up his hand for silence. He looked exhausted and defeated, his shoulders slumped. Fine, he said roughly. We leave. But make no mistake, Henrik Whitmore is no longer welcome in our settlement. He has made his choice and he will live with the consequences. If he or his orc ever set foot near our homes, they will be driven off or killed. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, Martha called back. Now take these men and go home. And Henrik, she raised her voice, addressing the cabin directly, you and your lady take care of yourselves up here. Some of us will remember kindness when we see it. Henrik felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, Martha, he called back. Thank you all. The men packed up their camp and rode away, Samuel at their head, not looking back. Most of the women left as well, though a few lingered long enough to wave at the cabin before departing. When the clearing was finally empty, Henrik and Grukara emerged from the cabin, blinking in the bright sunlight. The siege was over. They had survived. Grukara turned to Henrik, and there were tears running down her green cheeks. They stood up for us, she said wonderingly. Some of them, at least. They defended our right to be together. Henrik pulled her into his arms, holding her close. There is good in people, even when hatred seems overwhelming. Martha and the others saw that we were not a threat, that our love was real. They chose compassion over fear. That gives me hope, Grukara, real hope for the future. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the sunlight, feeling the weight of the past days lifting from their shoulders. They had faced the worst and survived it together. Whatever came next, they would face that together as well. The weeks that followed were a time of healing and rebuilding. The siege had taken a toll on both of them, leaving them jumpy and vigilant, but gradually they began to relax again. They returned to their routines of planting and tending the garden, making repairs to the cabin, hunting and gathering. Grukara began to teach Henrik some of the orc fighting techniques, showing him how to use his strength more efficiently in close combat. Henrik taught her to shoot the rifle, and she proved to be a natural marksman, her warriors' training translating well to this new weapon. They talked about the future more openly now, making plans for the years to come. Henrik wanted to expand the garden and perhaps add a few goats for milk and cheese. Grukara suggested they might set up a small forge where she could work metal, using skills she had learned in her clan. They both agreed that they would live quietly and peacefully, harming no one, defending their home if necessary but seeking no conflict. One evening, As they sat by the fire after a long day's work, Grukara spoke of something that had clearly been on her mind. "Henrik, what if there are children someday? Is that even possible between our kinds?" Henrik had wondered the same thing but had not wanted to push the subject. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have never heard of a human and orc having children together. It may not be possible." "Would that disappoint you?" Grukara considered this carefully. "I think I would like children," she said slowly. "I would like to raise them here in peace, teaching them to be strong but kind, to defend but not to hate. But if it is not possible, then I am content with what we have." "You are enough, Henrik. You are more than I ever hoped to have. And you are everything to me," Henrik said, taking her hand. "Children or no children, we will build a good life here. We will be happy, Grukara. I promise you that." She smiled at him, that rare, full smile that transformed her fierce features into something beautiful. "I know," she said. "I am already happy." As spring turned to summer, they received an unexpected visitor. Henrik was working in the garden when he heard a horse approaching and immediately tensed, memories of the siege still fresh. But this was a single rider, and as the figure drew closer, he recognized Martha from the settlement. He called out to Grukara, who emerged from the cabin with the rifle but relaxed when she saw who it was. They waited on the porch as Martha rode up and dismounted, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "Hello, Henrik. Hello, Grukara," she said, nodding to them both. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Henrik said, surprised and pleased. "It is good to see you, Martha. What brings you all the way out here?" Martha pulled a bundle from her saddlebag and held it out. "I brought you some things from the settlement. Seeds for late planting, some sugar and salt, a few other supplies I thought you might need. Call it a thank you for standing up to Samuel's foolishness." Henrik took the bundle, moved by the gesture. "You did not have to do this, I know, but I wanted to. And I wanted to see for myself how you two were doing up here." Martha looked around the homestead, taking in the neat garden, the well-maintained cabin, the general air of peaceful industry. "You have made a good life here." "We are trying," Grukara said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken directly to a human other than Henrik since the siege, and Henrik could hear the nervousness in her voice. Martha studied Grukara carefully, not with hostility but with genuine curiosity. "You are very different from what I expected," she said finally. "Samuel and the others talk about orcs like they are mindless beasts, but you seem as thoughtful and civilized as anyone I have met." "I am still learning how to live in peace," Grukara admitted. "It is harder than being a warrior in some ways, but Henrik is a good teacher. I can see that." Martha smiled. "You are good for each other. Anyone with eyes can see how you look at one another. That is something worth protecting." "Will the settlement continue to shun us?" Henrik asked, wanting to know what they might face in the future. Martha sighed. "Some will, yes. Samuel and his closest supporters have made it clear they want nothing to do with either of you. But others are more open-minded. There are a few families who have said they would be willing to trade with you if you come to the settlement. And I have made it known that anyone who wants to cause trouble will have me to deal with. You will not be welcomed with open arms, but you will not be driven away either as long as you cause no problems. We only want to be left in peace," Henrik said. "Then you shall have it, as much as I can arrange." Martha mounted her horse again, settling into the saddle. "Take care of each other, and if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." She rode away, and Henrik and Grukara stood watching until she disappeared among the trees. Then Grukara turned to Henrik, her eyes bright. "There is hope," she said softly. "Real hope that we might be accepted someday, or at least tolerated. I never thought I would see such a thing." Henrik pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "The world is changing, Grukara. Slowly, painfully, but changing. We are proof of that. One couple building a life together against all odds. Maybe we will inspire others. Maybe someday humans and orcs can live together in peace. Maybe, Grukara agreed. But for now I am content with this, with us, with home. They went back to their work, but the visit from Martha had lightened their spirits, given them a sense of connection to the wider world that they had been missing. They were not completely alone or completely rejected. There were people willing to see past old hatreds and recognize the value in what they had built. Summer passed in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. The garden flourished under their combined care, yielding an abundance of vegetables that they preserved for the coming winter. Henrik taught Grukara to fish in the creek, and she proved surprisingly patient with the slow work of waiting for a bite. They went on long walks through the forest, exploring the land around their homestead, marking good hunting spots and sources of wild herbs. At night, they would lie together in bed, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, making plans for their future. Grukara told Henrik about the mountains where she had grown up, the harsh beauty of the orc lands. Henrik told Grukara about the ocean, which he had seen once as a boy, describing the endless expanse of water and the cry of seabirds. "I would like to see the ocean someday," Grukara said wistfully. "To stand at the edge of the world and look out at all that water." "Then we will go," Henrik promised. "When we have saved enough, when the timing is right, we will travel to the coast and I will show you the sea. It will take time, but we have time. We have all the time in the world now." Autumn came, painting the forest in shades of gold and crimson. They harvested the last of the garden and prepared the cabin for winter, laying in supplies of firewood and preserved food. Henrik hunted deer, and Grukara helped him smoke and dry the meat, learning the techniques he had developed over his years of solitary living. One crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after finishing their dinner, Henrik realized that he had never felt more content or more at peace. The cabin was warm, their stores were full, and the woman he loved sat beside him, safe and healthy in his. "Grukara," he said suddenly, "will you marry me?" She turned to him, surprise clear on her face. "Marry you. In human fashion, in whatever fashion you want. I know we already bonded ourselves to each other in the orc way, but I want to make it official by my people's customs as well. I want to stand before witnesses, if we can find any willing, and declare my love for you. I want to wear a ring that marks me as yours, and for you to wear one that marks you as mine. I want the whole world to know that we belong to each other." Grukara's eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Henrik Whitmore, I will marry you in any way you wish. I am already yours in every way that matters, but I will gladly pledge myself to you again as many times as you want, in as many traditions as exist." Henrik pulled out a small wooden box he had been keeping hidden for weeks, working on its contents late at night when Grukara was asleep. Inside were 2 rings he had carved from bone and silver, simple but beautiful, engraved with intertwining patterns that represented their 2 lives coming together. He slipped one onto Grukara's finger, and she gasped at its beauty. Then she took the other and placed it on his hand, her touch gentle despite her great strength. "Bonded by blood and choice," she said, repeating the words from their first vow. "And now bonded by ring and oath," Henrik added. "My wife in every way that matters." "My husband," Grukara whispered, and kissed him with a tenderness that made his heart ache. They made love that night with a new intensity, celebrating their commitment to each other, reveling in the knowledge that they had chosen each other freely and completely. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Henrik traced the lines of Grukara's face with his fingers, memorizing every detail. "I never thought I would be this happy again," he said softly. "After my brother died, after I left the war, I thought the best I could hope for was a quiet life alone, free from more pain. But you have given me so much more than that. You have given me joy and purpose, and a reason to wake up excited for each new day." "You saved my life," Grukara replied. "Not just by treating my wounds, but by seeing me as a person when everyone else saw only a monster. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, love when I thought myself unlovable, hope when I had resigned myself to despair. I would have died in that first winter, either from my injuries or from the cold loneliness of exile. But you kept me alive, Henrik. You made me want to live." They held each other as sleep claimed them, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, building a life together in defiance of the hatred and fear that surrounded them. Winter came again, their second together, but this time there was no uncertainty, no careful distance. They were married now, committed to each other for life, and the cabin felt like a true home rather than a temporary shelter. They spent the long dark evenings planning for the spring, talking about adding more chickens, perhaps building a small barn, expanding the garden even further. Grukara had grown skilled at cooking and was experimenting with different recipes, combining human and orc culinary traditions in ways that sometimes worked wonderfully, and sometimes ended in laughter at the terrible results. Henrik taught her to read and write in the human script, and she proved an eager student, devouring the few books he owned and asking endless questions about the world beyond their homestead. On the longest night of winter, they held their own private celebration, lighting candles around the cabin and making small gifts for each other. Grukara had carved a new handle for Henrik's hunting knife, decorated with intricate patterns that told the story of their meeting and bonding. Henrik had sewn her a new tunic from deer leather, fitted to her larger frame and decorated with beadwork that had taken him months to complete. They exchanged gifts by candlelight, both moved by the thought and care the other had put into their work. Then they stood together at the window, watching the snow fall in the darkness, feeling the peace of the season settle over them like a blanket. "I am grateful," Grukara said softly, "for all of this, for you, for the life we have built. I know it has not been easy, that we have faced threats and challenges, but I would not trade this for anything. I would choose you and this life over anything my old world could have offered me." "As would I," Henrik said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You are my greatest blessing, Grukara. You are the answer to prayers I did not know I was praying. I love you." "I love you," she echoed, leaning back into his embrace. They stood there for a long time, watching the snow and counting their blessings. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to build a light together. Spring returned, as it always does, and with it came new life and new possibilities. Henrik and Grukara worked together to plant an even larger garden, adding new crops and experimenting with different techniques. They built a chicken coop large enough for 12 birds, planning to trade eggs at the settlement for other goods they needed. In late spring, Martha visited again, bringing news from the settlement and more supplies. She seemed pleased to see how well they were doing and mentioned that there were a few young people in the settlement who were curious about Henrik and Grukara, wondering if it might be possible to visit. "They are not hostile," Martha assured them. "Just curious. They have never met an orc who was not trying to kill them, and your story has spread. Some see you as proof that peace between the races might be possible." Henrik and Grukara discussed it, and agreed that they would welcome visitors, as long as they came in peace and with respect. Over the following months, a handful of young people did make the journey to their homestead, always in pairs or small groups, always nervous but genuinely interested. Grukara would talk to them about orc culture, answering their questions with patience and honesty. She did not hide the violence of her past, but contextualized it within the warrior society she had been raised in, helping them understand the pressures and expectations that had shaped her. She also spoke about her choice to leave that life behind, about the value she had found in peace and building rather than destroying. Henrik watched these interactions with pride, seeing how Grukara was becoming a bridge between two worlds, showing both sides that the other was not as monstrous as they had believed. It was slow work, changing minds and hearts, but it was happening. One summer evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a young couple from the settlement approached hesitantly. Henrik recognized them as farmers who lived on the eastern edge of the settlement, newlyweds trying to establish their own homestead. "We are sorry to intrude," the young man said nervously, "but we were hoping to ask your advice about something." "Of course," Henrik said, gesturing for them to sit. "What do you need?" The young woman glanced at her husband, then spoke. "We have been having trouble with our well. The water keeps running muddy, and we do not know how to fix it. We heard that you," she looked at Grukara, "might know about well construction. That orcs are skilled at digging and maintaining water sources." Grukara looked surprised but pleased to be asked. "I do know something about wells, yes. In the mountains, finding and maintaining water sources is essential for survival. I would be happy to look at your well and see if I can help." They made arrangements for Grukara and Henrik to visit the young couple's farm a few days later. When they arrived, they found that the well had indeed been poorly constructed, with loose stones allowing dirt to seep into the water. Grukara showed them how to properly seal the well walls and improve the filtration, working alongside them for the entire day until the water ran clear. The young couple was profoundly grateful, offering to pay with fresh bread and a jug of honey. As they prepared to leave, the young man spoke hesitantly. "Thank you, both of you. We were afraid to ask for help because of what people might say, but we were desperate. You have been kinder to us than some of our own neighbors." "Kindness should not be rare," Grukara said gently, "but I am glad we could help. If you need anything else, you know where to find us." As they rode back to their homestead, Henrik felt a surge of hope. This was how change happened, not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through small acts of service and kindness, through proving by example that old hatreds did not have to define the future. Over the next year, more people began to come to Henrik and Grukara for help with various problems. Grukara's knowledge of metalworking became valuable when tools needed to be repaired or forged. Henrik's medical skills were sought out when someone was injured or ill. Slowly, cautiously, they were becoming part of the community again, accepted not despite Grukara being an orc, but because they were good neighbors who helped when they could. Not everyone approved, of course. Samuel and his supporters still refused to acknowledge them, and there were those in the settlement who would never accept an orc among them. But the tide was turning, especially among the younger generation who had not lived through as much of the war and were more willing to judge individuals by their actions rather than their race. On their third winter together, something miraculous happened. Grukara began to show signs of pregnancy. Neither of them had believed it was possible, but as the months passed and her belly swelled, there was no denying it. They were going to have a child. The pregnancy was difficult, with Grukara suffering from sickness and fatigue far beyond what either of them had expected. Henrik cared for her with unwavering devotion, taking over all the heavy work and ensuring she had the rest and nourishment she needed. He was terrified, having no idea what to expect from a half-orc, half-human birth, but he hid his fear and remained calm and supportive for Grukara's sake. When the time came, it was Martha who helped with the delivery, having offered her services when she learned of the pregnancy. The birth was long and hard, lasting nearly a full day, but finally, as the sun rose on a spring morning, their daughter entered the world. She was tiny but healthy, with green-tinged skin that was lighter than her mother's and small nubs where tusks might someday grow. She had her father's eyes, bright blue and curious, and she wailed with impressive lung power when Martha cleaned her and wrapped her in cloth. Henrik held his daughter for the first time and felt tears streaming down his face. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is absolutely perfect." Grukara, exhausted but smiling, reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Our daughter," she said wonderingly. "We made a new life together, Henrik. A life that is both orc and human, a bridge between our peoples." They named her Hope, because that was what she represented: hope for a future where orc and human children could play together without fear, where mixed families could live in peace, where old hatreds could finally be laid to rest. Martha smiled down at the baby, her weathered face soft with joy. "She is beautiful," she said, "and she is going to change the world, this little one. You wait and see." As Martha left to return to the settlement with news of the birth, Henrik and Grukara sat together with their daughter, marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Hope nursed hungrily, already strong and determined, and they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else together, as a family. The years that followed were filled with joy and hard work. Hope grew quickly, strong and bright and curious about everything. She had her mother's courage and her father's compassion, and she moved between the human and orc parts of her heritage with an ease that astonished everyone who met her. More couples, both human and orc, began to seek out Henrik and Grukara's homestead, drawn by the story of their successful union and the proof that such relationships could work. Some were mixed couples who had been hiding their relationships in fear. Others were individuals from both races who were curious about the possibility of finding love across the divide. Henrik and Grukara welcomed them all, offering advice, support, and proof by their existence that peace and love were possible. Their homestead became a haven, a place where the old rules did not apply and people could simply be themselves. They expanded their home, adding rooms and buildings to accommodate visitors and the growing community that formed around them. It was never a large settlement, just a handful of families who chose to live apart from the rigid structures of both human and orc society, but it was home. It was a place of acceptance and hope, where children of all colors played together, and adults worked side by side without regard for old prejudices. Samuel never softened toward them, and there were always those who saw what they were building as a threat or an abomination. But there were also those who saw it as a beacon, proof that the long war between humans and orcs did not have to last forever. On Hope's 5th birthday, Henrik and Grukara stood watching as their daughter played with a mixed group of human and orc children, their laughter ringing through the clearing. Grukara took Henrik's hand, interlacing their fingers. "Do you remember when I arrived at your door, bleeding and desperate with nowhere left in the world to go?" she asked softly. "I remember," Henrik said. "I remember thinking I should turn you away, that helping you would bring nothing but trouble. I am so glad I ignored that thought." "You gave me everything," Grukara said, her amber eyes bright. "A home, a family, a purpose. You taught me that there was more to life than fighting and dying. You showed me that love could cross any divide, overcome any obstacle. You saved me, Henrik, in every way a person can be saved." Henrik pulled her close, kissing her tenderly. "And you saved me, Grukara. You brought light into my darkness, joy into my loneliness, hope into my despair. We saved each other." They stood together, watching their daughter play, surrounded by the community they had built, living proof that love was stronger than hate, that courage was more powerful than fear, that two people from opposite sides of a war could come together and create something beautiful. The orc woman had arrived bleeding from 3 wounds, saying she had nowhere left in the world. But she had found a home, and in finding it, she had helped create a new world, one where hope triumphed over hatred, and where love knew no boundaries of race or custom. Their story would be told for generations, an inspiration to all who heard it, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always the possibility of light, if only people had the courage to reach for it. And they lived happily, surrounded by family and friends, working the land they loved, raising their daughter to be strong and kind, and building a legacy of peace that would outlast them both. The wounds that had brought Grukara to Henrik's door had healed long ago, leaving only scars that reminded them of how far they had come. They had found their place in the world together, exactly where they belonged.